You know what I miss? Shoot 'em ups. You know that one generic game that you just can't put a name on, with a spaceship that goes left to right that squirts out projectiles at enemies appearing on screen from the right? Yeah, that's essentially the entire genre. Shoot 'em ups as a genre is honestly really vague, but the easiest way to describe their style and type is through example. In the late 1970s into the 80s, arcades grew incredibly popular both in the United States and abroad in countries such as Japan. Games like Space Invaders, Galaga, Asteroids, and more dominated the scenes, establishing a field of games very built around shooting enemies with explicit movement limitations implemented to add to the difficulty, along with actual technical limitations. The design is pretty simple. Move up, down, or wherever, aim, hit your target, and avoid being hit yourself. There were, of course, a few notable stragglers to the formula, such as Gorf. About to play the best game of all time. Gorf. Fantastic game. But these titles were very designed around the high score phenomenon that grasped audiences worldwide and absolutely gripped on the players who tried them. And it's not hard to see why. It was a numeric measurement of your success, something comparable to others. And with high scores and leaderboards, you could compare them to your friends and family, practice, and improve. And that design philosophy did wonders to arcade profits. Arcades continued to drag kids in from the streets, and machines sucked down quarters. Moving into the 80s with the advent of actually successful video game consoles, yeah, I'm probably not going to count these. The arcade innovations along with console releases honed the genre even sharper, with iconic genres emerging that became staples of the more standardized idea of what a shoot 'em up was. Gradius, R-Type, and many others continued the ideas of the originals, cutting out that interesting niche of side-scrolling shooters, and these are some of my absolute favorite. You've got games like Life Force on the NES, a port of Salamander in the Japanese arcades, a tough but incredibly solid shooter that's a spin-off from the Gradius series. Whenever you pick up these drops from enemies, you add it to this bar on the bottom, and when you reach the upgrade you want, you press B to claim it. I'm a bit of a bitch, so I always stick to laser. Bosses are fair but challenging for an NES game, and it even changes perspectives. Or how about another one, Argus for the Famicom? It's a better example of a more traditional side-scrolling shooter, but it's also far blander than Life Force. You scroll upwards, shoot enemies, and try not to get hit yourself. There's not much I can say for this one, besides it being an example of the times. It plays very similarly to Xevious at the end of the day. No bosses, just a landing strip to end each level. There's Magmax, where you can pick up pieces of a Robomech to improve your range and projectile frequency, but it's also the only game I've seen yet that lets you play as a snub of a spaceship with legs waddling around, shooting pyramids with huge ears and tails, so it's honestly a 10 out of 10 in my book. Section Z on the NES is a fantastic one by Capcom, and of course another arcade port. Interestingly, this one has a cool level of depth that I've really only seen in my collection with Life Force so far. You can shoot both forward and backwards, and you have to proceed through sections to destroy generators and encounter bosses. Each section ends with two possible paths to go down, some moving you forward, and some flicking you the middle finger and sending you to a previous level. It's simple but fun. Enemies can approach you from behind, which gives a new perspective to deal with besides just going right, and adds a lot of replayabilities with random corridors spanning from the fork in the road. Or Gyrus, a really odd one that headlined a subgenre known as tube shooters because... Take a shot why it's called that. A lot of these games stick to the sci-fi formula, which fits the style of the format very well, but not all shooters at the time did go in this direction. Frontline and Commando are two with a more military theme, and despite being unrelated and published by two entirely different companies, aren't that much different from each other. I have the Famicom versions here. You play as soldiers deep in enemy territory, swamped with the opponents breathing down your neck, and your goal is largely to build that high score, survive, and push onwards up the screen. Commando is definitely the better looking of the two, and way more solid. The character for Frontline looks like he slept on his entire body wrong, had a coconut drop on his head, and broke both his limbs. He's just trying to make it to lunch. Twin Bee was another series birthed in the arcades that took a more cartoony approach. Here I have Twin Bee 3 on the Famicom, one of the only console-only shmups I own from this period, actually. The art style is the biggest selling point in my opinion, with the protagonist being a spaceship with arms called Twin Bee that throws bombs at the ground below. You could stitch Twin Bee and the spaceship from Magmax together and you'd achieve a complete humanoid being. Give this fellow legs, man, come on. Shoot the clouds to drop bells which give you different projectiles, defeat the cymbals and metronomes attacking you, and kill a giant bold baby wearing glasses and a leather jacket. Pretty standard stuff. You'll find almost all of these games are published by names very big in arcades at the time. Taito, Jaleco, Midway, Capcom, Namco. The arcade success was a big part of what brought the genre forward, and brought around, of course, all of these console ports. And this honestly starts to change going into the 90s. Of course, you still see the classics hanging around, like Gradius 3 on the Super Famicom, and the jump in power definitely helps bring these arcade ports a little closer to their original selves. Gradius 3 looks and plays amazingly, but for some reason, it is so much more goddamn difficult, despite how entertaining it can be. The 90s also brings around a lot of emerging subgenres. Twinbee ended up being a precursor to the ever-expansive Q-em-up niche, mainly named so for their more adorable art styles and theming. This is one of my favorite subgenres, honestly. These games have an incredible amount of charm to them that makes them stand out, and they're also really easy, which helps because, look at me, this doesn't work. Harmful Park is a fantastic example of this on the PS1. Unfortunately, it's worth its weight in gold, and for good reason, because this plays amazingly, and it's just overall a really fun time. You can shoot jelly beans, ice cream lasers, and pies at enemies, as well as play a couple more arcadey-feeling player versus player minigames. The level design is just incredibly solid, which makes it a huge shame to hear that it's just a Japanese exclusive. Or the Cotton series is another really cool example. And I mean, looking past all the... it's equally great. The original, Cotton Fantastic Night Dreams, got plenty of ports across all sorts of platforms, but most fans will argue that the X68000 is the best version, that's the most loyal to the original. If it's not obvious I don't own a Japanese-only computer from the late 80s, this will have to do instead. Cotton Reboot, a remake based off that version. The game as a whole is honestly pretty challenging, and I would have never been able to beat it without that infinite continues most arcade-to-console ports seem to have. However, a lot of the time the game also tends to look like a virtual casino slot machine your grandmother plays when it gets a bit hectic. You had run-and-guns like running around and shooting at enemies that, well, metal-as-hell music going off in the background. All sorts of areas to make your way through, giant robot monsters to encounter, and holy hell, a metric crap ton of sequels. Playing this on an arcade is an awesome experience, and for those at home, there were also plenty of releases onto consoles, such as the Metal Slug anthology, compiling 1 through 6 as well as X into one neat little package. It's awesome. There's the Bullet Hells of the 90s, which became its own niche hellscape of masochists, because what the fuck is this? How can you keep up with this crap? Radiant Silvergun as well as Ikaruga were incredibly influential to the genre, and are now highly regarded as some of the best shmups have to offer. And Toho Project, a collection of Dojin Soft's PC games, is something I could only imagine attempting, because seriously, what the livid hell? By the 2000s, the genre definitely slowed down. It's hard to see the genre nowadays at the height that it used to be. Titles definitely exist, and it's never really dead, which undermines the entire intro to this damn video. But compared to seeing a shmup on the shelves back in the 80s and 90s, it's rare to find them today. A lot of the greats made a few releases in and out. Gradius received Gradius V on the PS2 and Rebirth, a WiiWare title, but besides that, it's gone through 2 mobile games and is now a slot machine. R-Type as well had a PSP release, and SNK sticks to re-releasing their old Metal Slug games, with the newest entry in the series almost all being spin-offs past 2010. And the AAA support has largely diminished with the exception of retro re-releases. In turn, indies have worked their asses off to keep the genre alive, and it's kind of fascinating to see that line of evolution going all the way back to the 70s. Countless, absolutely amazing shoot-em-ups have been released by the hands of indie developers. Prolific titles like Cuphead, which just this year got the most slamming DLC. Twin-stick shoot-em-ups like Enter the Gungeon. Earth Atlantis has this crazy pencil sketch art style. Zero Ranger has that perfect blend of retro bullet hell feel with a modern refinement. Countless upon countless indies hold up the genre today in a stupid, fascinating way. The title of a shoot-em-up is a genre rooted in its arcade origins, that high score in the corner. The tough-as-hell barrage of obstacles built around you getting frustrated and putting in another quarter or hitting that continue button. It really just doesn't change. You don't see a lot of development in the genre before, but in my opinion, that's just a solid testament to its value to fans and its design philosophies as a whole. But let's be real here, this is Inhuman.